He's doing well from his hip surgery. Let's see, birthdays and anniversaries. Spouse birthdays. We have James Silent on the 5th, along with me. And we have Jenny Stanley on the 7th. Robert Gildick on the 7th as well. And Sonia Haynes on the 9th. And then wedding anniversaries, Dave and Rhonda McDaniel celebrate 40 years on the 10th. Happy anniversary to them. No member anniversaries or road anniversaries this week. Share with you.
Hey, Lori.
No, it's fine, but it came out that way, so I don't know what sheet it is. So I'm gonna try to get the rest of it down.
Announcements. Chrissy, you want to share with us about the vaccine?
So we're still collecting sugar. I think we're 30 to 40 bags we still need. We have one member buy 100 bags of sugar, so grateful. So if you'll keep bringing the sugar, if you want some in today, you come fill out a ticket for the raffle. I'll give you that in the meeting. Do we talk about next week, next Friday? Sure. Okay, so next Friday is going to be an activity. We're going to be at First Baptist, and we're going to unload a bunch of food boxes for Doc Smith. So we'll have our meeting there, we'll have lunch, and then we will, so wear your tennis shoes, don't wear your high heels. And we'll unload a whole bunch of food boxes that have been given to us by the food bank. So we'll be able to give those away through our distribution in December. So,
Thank you. All right, and then we're going to continue with Rotary Minute, and I'm going to ask Aaron to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about why he joined Rotary.
President Lori, over again. My name is Aaron. So I recently joined, and what attracted me to Rotary was actually had a coworker that is in the Winchester Rotary. He really encouraged me to get involved. And my wife and I just taken a new position, and my wife and I were moving from Warrington to Breck Royal. And I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to get to know people in the community and to kind of give back and be involved in different things. And it really has been. I've got to know a lot of people in Breck Royal. It's a great town, and my wife and I are excited to live here, and I'm excited to be a part of Rotary. I grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia, and my brothers and I had a landscaping business in high school as teenagers. And so I've always been around landscaping. So right now I think there's trees, department transfer, and just want to be a part of Rotary and the community. Thank you.
Rotary why? Introduce yourself.
I'm Heather Clatterbuck. I think I'm going on 4 years. Amy, I joined under Amy, so we've had great stories there. The main thing for me was the service project. So I do love, especially like doing the coats and the ducks and baskets. I know every year, if you're like me, I always explain that I'm stuffed or I have to eat 3 meals going to different families, and then we're so fortunate because on the other end of that, people are getting no meals at all. So I really enjoy seeing the look on the people's faces when they come pick up the baskets and or if you're delivering them. So I just love the projects and what it stands for, and also that we help other countries with, the whole the water project. I think that's a remarkable thing. A lot of the organizations just help in the community, but we have so much more outreach.
Thank you. John, you want to share your Rotary why and introduce yourself?
Okay. I'm
Don't take
John
a while,
Marlowe.
Carol. Might as well work on
I joined Rotary when I was 28 years old. John Marlowe, we were fans at God. Mr. Marlowe, somewhere else. Playfield. In Rotary, we go by first name. Now, I said I was 28. That's where most of you all were born. So there have been a lot of changes in Rotary. When I came in Rotary, all male, a different type of organization. I'm not just sure when females came into Rotary, but I was involved. sponsored, I think, 5 one time I was told to sponsor for the first season. Also sponsored for Black to come into the Rotary Club. There have been a lot of changes in Rotary. Rotary for me was a place that you come to meet with the movers and shakers. Charlie Russell, who proposed it, said, Rotary won't ask you to do a lot, but if they ask you to do something, do it. And I think it's a little bit that way today. If they ask you to do something, it's probably worthwhile and you should do it. It's really been good. There's a lot of business that gets transacted at a Rotary meeting between the Rotarian, other than Rotary business. I think it should be that way enough. You know, this is a business meeting. Every meeting is a business meeting. To forewarn you, I've been thinking about making a motion to discontinue the Zoom, because I think Rotary's members should be at the Rotary meeting. You need to come in because you need the community atmosphere, you need the interchange, you need to be here. Zoom meetings, those who are maybe watching or may have plugged in and are not watching, I don't know, I think they need to be here. So your forewarned, be prepared because they may be coming soon. So that's about it for my Rotary today.
Stage of life, you can kind of say what you think.
Well, Alan, I was gonna make you our Florida correspondent, but I didn't think I was getting asked. Okay, so this is the time of year, and this is the meeting where we talk about nominations for candidates for the upcoming board. We will have members who rotate off the board and new members who come in to serve and learn the ropes and work their way up to president. Some members sit on as treasurer and secretary, and they don't go up in that progression to presidency. And I think they're okay with that. So right now, we have a candidate who's been proposed, and that is Michelle Napier. She's accepted the nomination. Thank you, Michelle. So now I need to call for any other nominations for candidates from the floor. Anyone else interested in running for a board seat? I can be quiet. Okay. All right, so no other nominations?
I think just close.
Okay. So nominations? Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. So if there are no other nominations, I will close nominations, and Michelle will be our candidate for the upcoming board. We'll vote, no opposed, we'll have a vote in December, just to make it all official. All right. $50. Yeah. Who's happy today? Yeah, happy.
I just got my golf course today. Beautiful weather out there.
Your name, Mommy?
No, I didn't play this week. I played for Friday.
Have you been though?
I got a happy Venmo money. My friend Rice is here today. You're all my friends.
I'm happy because I'm this afternoon. I'm heading down to Blacksburg to see my son, and Northern Virginia Daily picked Virginia Tech to be Georgia Tech across the board this time, so we might actually have a winning game tomorrow to see.
I have a happy dollar for Lori. I want to wish her a happy birthday. Thank her for all she does for the fun. We're headed to Mexico next weekend.
You need a traveling hygienist? I'll go.
I'm just happy that
All right. Attendance report. Debbie?
All right, Jerry, present morning, today we have 23 in-person members and 8 online.
All right, this is the fun part, program, I love it. So I am going to. Today we have Rusty Holland from Concern Hotline to do our program and speak to us today. Rusty is a former addiction counselor. He began volunteering with Concern Hotline in 1999, and he became the executive director in 2013. He has lots of information to share with us, so I'm going to sit down. Rusty, it's yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. It was a beautiful day to drive from Winchester to Front Royal. I just wanted to keep on going and get on the Skyline Drive, but figured I'd stop and talk to y'all for a few minutes first. I'm humbled to be here. This is actually the first time I've spoken to a group in Front Royal in quite some time. I was trying to think, I believe it was the Front Royal Rotary, the Front Royal Rotary, and it's been at least 7 years since I've spoken to Front Royal. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to do that because I think it's really important. And I was telling Lori when I first got here that I kind of changed my direction on what I wanted to speak about right before I started driving over here. So I brought some notes, and as Lizzie, my friend Lizzie, will tell you, I don't normally use notes when I speak. So I want to make sure I get some things right and we get the information you need today. So first of all, I want to just give you a brief history of Concern Hotline. We've been a nonprofit since 1979. We've been in the Winchester to Newmarket area since 1968. And we actually came into existence because of a connection to Front Royal. In 1968, the Northern Shenandoah Valley had the highest suicide rate per capita on the East Coast. And the reason is that veterans were returning from Vietnam and they were driving up to Dickey Ridge and they were taking their life by jumping off the mountain. And a group of entrepreneurs and philanthropists decided that there needed to be resources for these volunteers. And hence Concern Hotline was born as an information and referral hotline for volunteers, for veterans returning from Vietnam. We morphed into a suicide prevention hotline, but because at that time, not to steal a line, but before most of you were born in 1968, there weren't very many hotlines. And the Concern Hotline was a national model that was actually modeled after the AA 12-step anonymous and confidentiality model to protect the confidentiality of the veterans at return. So this connection between Winchester and Front Royal was really one of necessity rather than one of, let's reach out to different communities. We really saw the need to start identifying resources for the veterans. So fast forward, give you a little glimpse, we're going to be 55 next year. So fast forward 55 years, we've morphed through so many different possibilities. That information and referral that we did, we printed a source book. Some of you might even still be familiar with the Concern Hotline source book we printed for years. But that source book got usurped by Google in the early 1990s. And our number of phone calls went from about 12,000 a year down to about 4,000 a year, almost immediately when Google started really supplying that information for people. So it made a drastic change in what we were doing. So we kind of switched into what we call compassionate listening hotline. So what does that mean? It sounds kind of like a touchy-feely kind of phrase, but what it is it's an opportunity for individuals to call anonymously and confidentially and talk about anything they feel they need to talk about that might be on their mind at that time. Free of charge, free of judgment, free of any type of connections to anybody else in the community. It's just a one-on-one one-on-one confidential phone call where individuals can get connection and receive compassion. Who answers the phone? So throughout the years, we've done different training programs. Presently, I think that our training program is the strongest it's ever been. We train not only community members, but we entered into an agreement with Shenandoah University several years ago, where we train in a class called Clinical Helping Skills. These are seniors that are graduating from Shenandoah in occupations that are related to helping skills with other people, and they are trained, the Concern Hotline listener training, vetted, and then if they're a fit, they're put onto the hotline for their semester that they're in the class. The wonderful thing is these young people have done a couple of things. Number one, they opened my eyes to the humanity of these college students who finish their semester and then stick around for more semesters when they don't have to, number one. And number two, they've shown us that the demographic change on our hotline, bringing all those young people, that influx of young people was like a shot in the arm for us, because it gave us a wider perspective of understanding of current topics, current needs, and current communication patterns, because obviously we all know communication patterns have changed so much in the last decade, 2 decades, amazingly, that it's hard to keep up with everything that changes every day. I mean, I'm not a Twitter, but everything's changing with Twitter. So, that's been in the news. It's going to change again. So communication patterns always have been changing, but the one thing that's remained stable since 1968 is our ability to compassionately connect with someone who might be struggling through something in their day. Whether it's in a chronic situation that they struggle with every day, or whether it's an acute situation that they only struggle with for a moment. I'm going to talk a little bit about that moment and what that means as I move a little farther into this. I want to just also shout out to my board of directors. We're really lucky and blessed to have 2 board of directors in the county of Warren. One of them is at your table. Lizzie has been on our board for 5 years now and has been a remarkable help for us in Warren County to get information out and work within the community. She's quite a mover and shaker, as most of you know. She doesn't sit still. Yep, it's cheap. The other board member we have in Front Royal is a lady by the name of Michelle Smeltzer, and some of you might know Michelle. She works at the Department of Social Services. She's a community liaison, and she again is a mover and shaker. So we couldn't be happier that we have a strong board representation within the community of Front Royal. And I think it's because they understand our mission. They understand our connection to how we choose to connect to others. And once we connect, what we do. I think so many people, and I've been there since 1999. Oh my gosh, I feel old. But I was there in 1968 because my mother was one of the individuals who helped start Concern Hotline. And so I've kind of come full circle. I'm no longer a counselor, or a therapist, but I spend my time full time in Concern Hotline. So things have really changed, but the more they change, the more they stay the same. So along with our board, what we've been able to do recently in Front Royal, the biggest thing I think we've done, and I thank Lizzie for this, is Cardinal baseball. We were at the home games for Cardinal baseball this year. We signed a 3-year contract to be there to give out information for Concern Hotline to everybody who comes through the gate, to support not only baseball. My father played professional baseball. That was a personal aside. He played for the Cardinals, so it was really easy for me to say yes to Lizzie when she said, "Do you want to support the Cardinals?" Yes, of course I did.
I didn't tell him which Cardinal.
Yeah, so we, yeah, she did that. So, we've done that, and if you, some of you might have seen the magnets that we put out, that we've been giving out at the games, that are great refrigerator magnets that have our phone number right on them. So you have that number all the time. That same number is on a couple of your tables, and there's some more little trinkets up here that have our numbers on them. So please take one of those cards that does have an emergency number on it, 24/7 help. We just recently, this past September, we participated with the Northwestern Suicide Awareness and Wellness Committee in a motorcycle rally that started in the Front Royal Moose, went down through Newmarket, then through Luray, and then back up to Front Royal. And we raised a little over $1,500 for the first time on an awareness ride. So that's going to happen again in September of next year. And so we're looking to really make that a big impact and pull in some more community partners and watch that awareness ride grow. That's a great way to spread awareness throughout our coverage areas. And I feel that, you know, the farther I get away from Winchester towards our southern catchment area down here, Luray, the more watered down our message has become. It's harder to get our message out. We really need to be pushing it down here. And that's some of the things that our board are working on a monthly basis. In February, we did a training that was one of the specifically designed trainings for Warren County educators at Laurel Ridge Community College. I'm an LFCC grad, so I'm having a hard time saying that right now. But we trained what we call ASSIST, which stands for Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, which is training individuals face-to-face abilities to recognize suicide, what we call invitations. People put out invitations into their lives on a daily basis. You know, people don't look at you when you're walking around, keep your eyes down. People don't make eye contact, they usually don't talk, but keep your eyes up and look at somebody in the eyes. That's kind of an invitation to talk. Same kind of thing with suicide. Invitations are put out. Our ASSIST training is trained individuals to recognize these invitations and then teaches them what to do with them after they see them. So I'd be more than happy to talk more about that at another time, but I kind of want to get into some stuff here, and I'm not. Are we until 1 o'clock? I know. Is that what you say? 12:55. Perfect. Perfect. So we also offer some other types of trainings. We've got a community training that's coming up December the 5th in Winchester. That is a community listener training. So if anyone's interested, I have cards, you can contact me later. We'd love to get you into the corral of hotline listeners. It's a very easy volunteer. It takes 4 hours a week. It takes about 12 hours of training and then 4 hours of role play with pretty significant training. And then once you're vetted after that, it's 4 hours a week is all we ask for. So if you're interested, I'd be more than happy to talk to you after the meeting or connect after the meeting.
Hey, Rusty, what does that 4 hours look like? Not like 4 hours of work, like solid work in 4 hours?
So for that 4 hours, it's kind of like you're on call. All of our phone calls, that's one of the things I want to get into, all of our phone calls are routed to an answering service that then sends them to our volunteers. Currently, we have 42 active listeners on the hotline right now. There is a listener on right now. There's a listener on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in a 4-hour shift. Being on call means that all the calls for Concern Hotline are being routed to your phone for that 4-hour period. Now we receive, we're online to receive about 3,200 phone calls this year. So that's about 8 or 9 a day. So you spread out 8 or 9 phone calls a day and you spread them out into 4-hour shifts. That means you're probably going to you might get 1, 2, 3 phone calls. Not all the phone calls are suicide. They're compassionate listening calls. We are listening to the struggles of someone else trying to make it through the day. Some of them are suicide and crisis. I will tell you that I've had a number of significant crisis phone calls from Warren County in my time on the hotline, in my 4-hour shifts. And some of the calls I've received from this community are some of the most impactful things on my life personally as a employee of Concern Hotline. So, that 4 hours, you can take them on your cell phone, you can be sitting on your couch, you can be in the grocery store. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a store and my phone's ringing and I'm like, okay, I'll be right there. So I've got to go and take a call. But it's an easy volunteer. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to lift anything. You don't have to get dirty. You don't have to wear anything special. You don't have to cook anything. You don't have to see anybody. All you got to do is sit there and wait for the phone to ring. I mean, how easy is that? So good question. Thank you. That's why she's on the board. Not up here. All right, so a couple years ago, our board started kicking around membership in something called the National Lifeline, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Some of you might be familiar with, a little more familiar with that now, because recently, as July of this year, the National Lifeline published a number, 988. Are y'all familiar with that? Anyone familiar with that? This is my second Rotary meeting this week. I won't ask for a show of hands in here because I think the last Rotary meeting wasn't real happy that I asked for a show of hands for people that had heard of 988. Now, how many of you have heard of 211? Can I ask that question? Can you raise your hand? Anybody heard 211? 211 Virginia. 211 came out about 20 years ago, and it's like an informational number. You call 211 and you ask somebody in the state, hey, can you tell me where a dentist that doesn't use opiates in Front Royal is? And they'll look and they'll try to help you out. That's what we used to do with Concern Hotline. We worked with 211 when they first moved into the community 20 years ago. They actually took part of our model to use it. But when's the last time you called 211? When's the last time you called 411? You know, and hopefully you haven't had to call 911 anytime recently. 988 is like 911 or 411 or 211. So when we started hearing about the 988 number that was going to roll out and become a national number, we thought, well, where do we fit into this? So we started deciding whether or not we wanted to be part of the Lifeline. So I started getting statistics and I started looking at what the Lifeline was, started talking about membership in some of these suicidology associations that would give us a little bit more professionalism and maybe access to some national granting. And October 1st, we were accepted as the 5th call center in the state of Virginia to receive 988 phone calls. Those 988 calls probably won't start for another 4 to 5 months as we go through the protocols with them. But I think it's the right thing for us to do in moving into a national model. And I'll explain a little bit about 988. This is one of the reasons that I really felt it was important. When the phone rings at 988, it goes to a call center. And that call center starts looking for somebody to listen. And they start pinging concentrically until they find a listener. I don't think my arm is long enough sometimes to reach as far as I have to find a listener. Someone from Front Royal could call and maybe not get a listener until it hit Philadelphia or Norfolk or Virginia Beach. The point is, they're not going to get a community member. So we felt for us to be able to continue to provide suicide prevention awareness and compassionate listening to the communities of the Northern Shenandoah Valley, we could do two things. We could maintain Concern Hotline numbers, and we could start a 988 number. So when people from this area call, they still get connected to local listeners who understand local issues and local geography. I remember one of my calls with a listener from Warren County who lived up in Linden. He was an older gentleman who had lost his dog. I'm a dog person, so it was one of those tearjerker calls, and I knew right where he was calling from. I grew up running around these parts, so I knew exactly where he was calling from, and that really made him feel better as he talked to me that I knew where he was calling from. Gave him some warmth, some of that warm, fuzzy compassion stuff that I was talking about earlier. So, as we move forward with 988, we'll be able to respond not only to the individuals who know our phone numbers through years of these numbers being published in the Valley, but also through 988. And hopefully 988 will continue to grow. They're having a lot of growing pains, and that's a whole nother discussion I could come talk to you about, something called community response teams, mental health teams in communities, things that we're working on with the committee out of Charlottesville. The closest community mental health response team to us right now, if there was a suicide and someone called 988, the response is supposed to be a team of mental health professionals that goes out and works with these people. The closest one to us is in Charlottesville. So how is that going to affect the crisis? So we continue to utilize the tools that we have in place. Those tools have gotten better, but they need to continue to move towards that model of having quick access, I guess is the best way to put that. So, but when I was starting to look at the Lifeline, something popped up. Lifeline said to me, "You take phone calls in Warren County?" Sure did, every day. You know, does anybody know that? I'm gonna tell you what that means. So a suicide cluster has been labeled by the CDC as a public health menace. It means that there is a greater than expected number of cases of disease or an occurrence that occurs within a group of people within a period of time, typically weeks. And these group of cases are referred to as a suspected cluster. There are 4 common criteria in identifying a cluster. Number 1, a greater than expected number. What that means is if they take a look at a geographic area and they say there should be 1.003 suicides per 100,000 people in a year, and let's say there were 3.100,000, that is a significant increase. So a greater than expected number of suicides. Number 2, a specific group of people or population. That could be age, that could be sex. I think that, the next one kind of comes hand in hand with that, is that number 3, there's a connection between cases. Like, for example, geographic area, a nursing home, a school, a community at large. And I speak in generalities, but I know that these topics are significantly impactful for this community. And I know the Concern Hotline has been here in front of these calls for the last couple of years, and I know exactly how hard this community is trying to identify these connections. The 4th common criteria is a time period. Typically, they say the clusters must happen within a couple of weeks, but because of the other criteria they've established, they say if a certain number within a certain group happens in a certain place within a certain amount of time, this can be considered a cluster. So they looked at the last 2 years in Warren County. And they're looking at what occurred in the last 2 years in Warren County and why has there been an increase of suicide. And I'm not going to talk demographics. I'm just going to talk suicide. Doesn't matter. Suicide is suicide. So there are 2 most common types of clusters are point clusters. Number 1, specific time and a specific location. Again, this is like at a school or a university or a nursing home. And number 2, a mass cluster. A mass cluster means that there's a specific geographic area that has so many suicides per capita. I think that's what we're looking at here. I think we're looking at a geographic area because the areas have not been identified as a single geographic location like a church or a school or a nursing home, but more so spread out over a wider area. So one of the things that I think we need to talk about suicide when we're talking about clusters is what is suicide and what are these self-harm injuries? How do they happen? And there are the three most common factors that we see involve firearms, suffocation, and poisoning. Now, suffocation and poisoning you see more in self-harm. Firearms you see more in suicide. That's an obvious issue. It's kind of hard to dial back on a firearm. But in this community and many other communities like this that I'll define as rural in their nature, the access to firearms is significant. That leads to the number one way for these self-injurious and suicidal behaviors to occur is through firearms. It may be difficult to determine if there are connections between cases, People don't need to know each other. One of the things you need to understand, I think, is that suicide is a heterogeneous issue. There are no typical suicidal patients or typical suicidal thoughts or typical suicidal behaviors. It's like when you get the flu. Everybody gets the flu a little different. This is a public health issue, and it is exacerbated through contact, it's exacerbated through environment, it's exacerbated through many things. You can't put your finger on any one reason. So one of the biggest issues is making sure that we stay connected in order to be able to recognize when these issues come up. You know, some of the other connected factors that I've already mentioned, social media contact, maybe connections to a third party that has committed suicide. I think that, you know, I call that copycat. You know, that's a way we kind of look at it. There seems to be a lot of suicide role modeling in the United States right now, particularly amongst adolescents. So one of the things we talked about is chronic versus acute. And I think it's real clear that suicidal ideation and thoughts wax and wane. If there have been a number of suicides in the community, everybody is heightened and the conversations are moving along. But the other thing that's moving along is that role model. So there are a lot of characteristics that fluctuate in and out. And again, let's go back to those invitations. Being able to recognize those invitations is vital to be able to understand when they're waxed. Cluster suicides account for an estimated 5% of all teenage deaths in the United States. That means if one does it, and another one does it, and another one does it, that's a teenage suicide cluster. These are where some of these numbers are coming from. So what do we do? What do we do? This is terrible stuff, right? You know, one of the things that I really feel is important is that we do this together. That we don't segment our interventions into suicide, that we take this on as a community. And there's a couple of things I think we can do together. Number one, stop the stigma. Stop the stigma. Talk about suicide. Talk about mental health. Remember back when you couldn't talk about mental health? My grandparents actually had a family member that they kept in the third floor of their house because of mental health. That's the stigma. This is how far we've come. I'm up here talking about mental health and suicide. That's quite a leap. But it needs to leap again. We need to continue to fight the stigma. Talk about it. Make yourself aware. Look at what some of the trainings are. Secondly, let's plan. Let's plan a training. Let's plan to understand what the mission is. Let's plan to understand who the target cluster individuals are. Let's start to recognize that some of these communication patterns that are floating around the community need to be changed. Words are strong. Let's get together, let's talk, let's plan, let's train, and then let's come up with a way that we can stop the stigma as a community together. One of the things I used to talk about was, years ago, the percentage of individuals who had been touched by suicide at one time in their life or another. And people used to say, oh, no, I didn't think about suicide. I never thought about suicide. I never talked about suicide. I call foul. When I first took this job, I've been in mental health and I've been a social worker for years. I didn't know the first thing about suicide. I knew it because I volunteered at Concern Hotline. I had a little bit of training, but I didn't know the first thing. And I made it my priority to understand a little bit more about suicide and understand it. And I can tell you right now that there is 100% of the individuals in this country have thought about suicide at one time or another, whether it be their own or someone else's, and how it's impacted their life. That's the first stigma we need to break. understand that we're all in this together. And those waxing and waning acute moments. We lost a community member in Winchester a couple weeks ago in a very waxing and waning situation, which was a terrible impact to us. And it's still, and Lizzie and I had a conversation with it a couple weeks ago. It's been very impactful for me. So I understand the waxing and waning very well, but I think there are methods that we can do together. There's teamwork that we can put together to meet this head on a little bit harder. And through actions like yours in the community, by going out and saying, hey, we got to talk about suicide. Talk about suicide. That used to be really verboten. One of the things I'm really proud of, this will be the last thing I said. We just signed a contract and have just completed training our first Catholic school. I don't know how to say this. We've entered agreement with the Diocese of Virginia, and we are training Catholic school counselors and other school members, their faculty, in suicide awareness and intervention techniques. We just finished our first school in Alexandria last month. And I'm just so excited as we look through 30-some schools they've asked us to train. So I'm really excited because 10 years ago, you couldn't say the word suicide in a Catholic school. And now they're training people. And it's because they got together as a community and decided they needed to do something. And that's what y'all are here for. And when you're ready to do something, you've got a member here that will jump right on it. So I appreciate your time. And I know I didn't need a whole lot of time for questions, but I wanted to get through some of this cluster stuff. I really usually don't talk about things like that, but I think it's important. Thank you very much.
Where can we find a list of the trainings or scheduled trainings that we offer?
Scheduled trainings, we don't put out a list until we get them.
Okay.
The December 5th training is a community training that will happen in Winchester. I'll be happy to give you my contact information here today. You got it right there. But that's the hotline number.
Oh.
I'll give you my card, and you can send me an email, and I'll get you on the list.
Thank you.
What might be a typical week in our community as far as calls? I'm sure there's some variability, but would you say Warren, Fort Royal, Warren County would get 2 calls a month or?
So I'd say it's probably closer to 2 or 3 a day. One of the things that happened with us, CenturyLink is your phone carrier. I'm not going to say anything too terrible about it, but we don't have any numbers. So we have a new answering service that's allowing us to look at numbers again for the first time. The problem is everybody's got a cell phone with different area codes, and we don't know where those calls are coming from. But I would say it's at least 2 a day from Warren County.
A lot of times people will volunteer where they're calling from. That's how we know that.
We ask, can you tell me what community you're calling from today? And a lot of times people, most people were pretty cooperative.
And why do we ask that, Rusty?
For crisis response.
So if we need to call, if a listener needs to call 911 to connect them with the appropriate. If you got to do a wellness check or something worse, you need to know what municipality you're calling from.
We have great relationships with all law enforcement here locally. I've been on the phone with quite a few deputies as they knocked on the front door of somebody who had a gun in their hand on the other side of the door in Warren County. Any other questions? And Lindsay's here for questions, so obviously she knows it as well as I do, so she's more than happy to jump in. But thanks.
Thank you
Very
so
much.
much. It's such a difficult subject. We have our magnets up in our office. Also, when patients are sitting there, because when you work in healthcare, a lot of times you have seniors who are lonely and they need someone to talk to, and when they realize that's there, that's an outlet for them. That's a way for them to have someone who will listen. So, not just seniors, but all demographics.
Those are our two highest topic phone calls are loneliness and isolation. Those are the two highest topic calls.
Can you do me a favor? Will you draw for our $5 big dollars? All right. I'll see you guys.
Yeah, I didn't have my glasses.
Okay, the number is 200-447. 447. Down, all right. Congratulations. If you'll stand with me for the four-way test. And just stand and please remember that this is closed. Next week, we will be at First Baptist Church. I'll send out a reminder to you through the week, but we will be at First Baptist Church next week, okay? The things we think.
Say or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? The fourth, be beneficial to all concerned.
Have a great week.
If anyone wants to take some more